thought forms and agreement fields. I thought because of the inundation of so many different things going on, so many qualities attacking the system all at once, that it might be a good idea not to look at the symptoms, but to really start to try and think about the deeper cause, about what was called in tradition an egregore, a thought form, meaning that we human beings, are energy beings. We know this. We're atomic beings. We vibrate. But we are also absorbing qualities of consciousness, meaning that we absorb our territory, we absorb the environment, we smell it, we participate in it. But oftentimes what we don't realize is we're also oftentimes really drawn into an agreement field, a type of thought form. And this is why oftentimes the most exaggerated would be a type of mob, where one says, I don't know how I found myself there or how I did what I did. I never would have done that had it not been whatever this other energy was that swept me into that. And this helps us really with the present moment, because we begin to recognize that when there is an inundation, I used to joke with Carla, over the years we showed a lot of documentaries, and after a while I said, you know, they've really freed me, because you start to realize everything's trying to kill you, everything has an agenda, everything is not what it appears to be. So you have to beware. But if you think more from a warrior's position, like a samurai, you say, well, you realize you have one sword, you can't fight the battles of the world, you must attend that quality that you are engaged in. And this is why a thought form is not simply out there somewhere. Because you can say we live in the thought form of contemporary culture, whatever that is. We live in the thought form of a political structure, whatever that might be. But we are the generator of the thought form we think of as ourselves. And that we are the generators of what we might consider an agreement field, whether we are conscious that we're making an agreement or not. In other words, it's saying, this is who I am, this is how I define myself. I found this as an actor, that every character was based upon, I am this and I'm not that. And from that simple structure, an entire worldview would start to emerge. And because of that, it became quite apparent that, oh, it's interesting that in theater we call it the suspension of disbelief, meaning that to enter a character, to embody, to become, is to move away from having to believe, critique, or be against something. Like, you can't be against the character you're playing. You have to figure out, well, how do I enter the character? How, if the character sees the world completely differently than I do I allow that character's truth to be the character's truth that moves through me, rather than my critique of what that truth is? This is why agreement is essential to perception, and why the agreement about who and what we think we are is imperative in terms of whether or not the secondary influences of media, culture, our disappointment, the anxiety of having to do this, that, and the other thing, whether we are being shaped and defined by that. In other words, are we, because of the collective thought form, feeling that we are not living, but we are being lived? And that's when, again, going back into the sense of the agreement field. And this was my question when I began the Hieroglyph of the Human Soul. When the towers in New York collapsed and something in me collapsed and said, I can't do this anymore. I can't pretend that there is these magnificent erections of money and God. If you have all of this or you have all of that, you'll be liberated and you'll be free. You'll stand powerfully, majestically. But it didn't turn out to be true. You could look at history and say there's no example where it actually lasts. I mean, maybe somebody rises into a condition, but they all die. So it's not like, oh, they did it. It's like, no, there's a season where they accomplish something, but it all ends the same way. Not one of them figured out a way to get out of their agreement field, their thought form. And that's what's intriguing, to think about this much more as a type of holographic environment, meaning how much of this is mental and how much of it is physical. Now, we're taught by fear-mongering and those that seek for a one way, like we're all a light bulb and all we have to do is turn on and turn off. Well, no, we're not. We're human beings. And like the library, we are as diverse as every book in the library, because each book is human, and yet uniquely a unique adventure of what that means. So the question of our thought form and agreement now is the sense of where and why would it be that we're at this point in history? Let's put ourselves in context. Let's not stop talking abstractly, thinking, oh, philosophically this means, but no, why are we in a time of a type of inundation of darkness? Why does it seem that everything has a type of bottom line, a type of inhumanity? Oh, it's just the numbers, it's a formula. Science doesn't need humanity. We've learned so much. We can have artificial intelligence become our new God. These qualities essentially are challenging not the thought form out there, but the agreement field in here. Because everyone that has allowed for the falling away of the shackles of other people's beliefs, other people's disappointment in the world, and one's own disappointment that whatever it was one thought was supposed to be, one isn't. This is the other question. It brings it closer to home. That's why this is all about art or the arts or creation as well. Because music has never stopped any of these other energies of agreement. But they have each time reacted or responded to the conditions of the collective thought form, not by saying, I identify with it, but rather saying, at least here, I will, even if it's anguish, take this and turn it into something that I can share, something I can grow, something I can honor. And if we think of this not as a personal impulse, but actually as a human impulse, the impulse toward a thought form and an agreement that begins to say the unique power that I possess is not that I can convince you, not that I can convince anyone else, but that I can finally agree within myself that if this is a thought form, if Einstein's right, that reality is thought slowed down to a rate where we could perceive it, then we're thought forms. We are living thought forms, animating ideas. So to change our idea begins to change the thought form, which also changes the agreement field. And I would argue on a fundamental level, it's a bit like if you watch the process of rehearsal with musicians or dancers or actors or sports where people really become prepared for something. They create the conditions that finally allow for true performance. And they recognize that the vigilance is not the thought form or the agreement of escape, but the realization that one is the thought form. One is thought slowed down to a rate where one can be oneself. And if that's the case, then it's very true that as one thinks, so one becomes. And it's not to think our way out of contradiction. It's actually to take the contradictory nature of thinking and to allow it to relocate us in a way that says, if this is all being made up, how can I improve the story I'm telling? Not for them, but for me. When you look around and you see all of the painters who continued to paint, even though the world ignored them, all the writers that still wrote because they needed to, not because people cared, you see a deeper meaning that's not any one of them, but a deeper yearning in all of us to keep going. I wish it mattered, but you know what? It does, because this form, this thought form now, recognizes that we are that which, by allowing a reset in our narrative, allows the narrative to reset. We are that thought form and that agreement field we think of as ourselves. So let's dream ourselves more intimately with a bit more wonder. And as I say, when you're home, if no one listens, close the door and have a moment that says, maybe I can agree. I'm supposed to be here.